From screen legend to prisoner of a single image. It lasted just a few seconds. A quiet moment in a film where a woman, sitting calmly in an interrogation room, shifted her posture. She crossed her legs. That's it. And yet, that moment would go on to define, and in many ways, confine, the rest of Sharon Stone's career. It was 1992. Basic Instinct was about to explode into theaters, and Sharon Stone, until then a relatively unknown actress with a handful of minor roles, was cast as Catherine Trammell, a seductive, enigmatic woman suspected of murder. It was a role that demanded intelligence, manipulation, allure, and danger. And Sharon played it to perfection. But for most of the world, the only thing they remembered wasn't the nuance of her performance. It was that leg-crossing scene. The moment became one of the most paused scenes in cinematic history. The camera lingered, intentionally, and audiences everywhere gasped, some in shock, others in fascination. Overnight, Sharon Stone was no longer just an actress. She became a global sex symbol. Her name was suddenly in every newspaper, on every late-night show. But it wasn't her acting they were talking about. It was her body. What the public didn't know then, and what Sharon later revealed in interviews and in her memoir The Beauty of Living Twice, is that she felt deceived by the way the scene was filmed. According to Sharon, the director, Paul Verhoeven, asked her to remove her underwear because the white fabric was reflecting the studio lights. He assured her nothing inappropriate would be visible, only a slight shadow, just enough to maintain the scene's ambiguity. But when she sat in a dark theater at the first screening and saw what the camera had truly captured, she was mortified. She stood up, walked over to Verhoeven and slapped him across the face. In that moment, she realized she had just become a spectacle, not by choice but by manipulation. Verhoeven, for his part, denied any wrongdoing, claiming that Sharon knew exactly what was being filmed. It was her word against his. And in the court of public opinion and Hollywood studios, the truth didn't matter. The damage was already done. Sharon Stone was now branded. The fallout was immediate and long-lasting. Suddenly, every script she received demanded her to be sexy, mysterious, dangerous. The more complex parts, the ones that showed her intelligence, her emotional range, her vulnerability, were nowhere to be found. Hollywood had decided what Sharon Stone was. Not a serious actress, not a woman of depth, but a sex symbol. And that was the box she was trapped in. There's a painful irony here. Sharon Stone delivered a performance in Basic Instinct that was layered, sharp, and completely magnetic. She took a role that could have easily fallen into cliché and turned it into something unforgettable. But it wasn't her talent that people talked about. It was the angle of a camera and the assumptions it fed. This is a story that plays out far too often in Hollywood, especially for women. An actress gives the performance of her life, only to be reduced to a moment that wasn't entirely hers. Think of how Megan Fox was sexualized after Transformers, or how Marilyn Monroe struggled to be taken seriously despite her incredible comedic timing and intelligence. Sharon Stone wasn't the first, and she wouldn't be the last. But in her case, the consequences went even deeper. She wasn't just typecast. She was frozen in time, as if the entirety of her existence could be summed up in that one scene. Directors stopped calling. Casting agents didn't know where to place her. She was too sexy to be taken seriously, and too serious to be trusted with just sexy roles. It was a lose-lose. In interviews years later, Sharon said something striking. Fame is a very poor teacher. And she was right. The overnight success that came with Basic Instinct felt like a reward, but it came without guidance, without support, and without protection. She was left to navigate it all on her own, in a town that praised beauty but rarely respected women who challenged it. The story of Sharon Stone's rise is dazzling, but the reality behind it is sobering. Yes, one scene launched her into stardom, but it also narrowed the world's view of who she could be. And when an actress is seen only through the lens of sexuality, her voice, her truth, her humanity can be easily dismissed. Because fame, when it comes too fast and too fiercely, can feel less like a crown and more like a cage. The lonely brilliance of a girl who was never meant to fit the mold. Before the world ever knew her name, before cameras followed her down red carpets or her face appeared on magazine covers, Sharon Stone was just a little girl in Meadville, Pennsylvania, a small, industrial town surrounded by open fields and factory smoke. But even then, there was something unmistakably different about her. By the time she was just 15 months old, she could already walk and speak in complete sentences. At age 5, she was reading chapter books, her IQ, a staggering 154, a score that placed her well within the realm of genius. You would think being that intelligent would open doors, that people would see her potential and celebrate it, but instead, it did the opposite. From the beginning, Sharon felt like an outsider. She wasn't just the smartest girl in the class. She was too smart. She learned faster, questioned more, saw through things that other kids took for granted. While her peers played with dolls and rode bikes, Sharon was devouring literature and thinking about the world in ways most adults hadn't even begun to. And rather than earn her admiration, this made her a target. She was called weird, bookworm, know-it-all. Her classmates didn't understand her, and many didn't even try. Instead, they kept their distance. The other girls whispered. The boys laughed. She was the girl who corrected the teacher, who never got a question wrong, who looked at the world with a gaze that said she saw more than anyone else around her. And for kids, especially in a small town, different can be dangerous. What's heartbreaking is that Sharon didn't just feel like she didn't belong. She was taught that she didn't. In a world that often expects girls to be sweet, quiet, and agreeable, Sharon Stone was sharp, curious, and intense. And that, to many, was threatening. Let's pause and compare that to other famous women of high intelligence, women who were allowed to be smart. Natalie Portman graduated from Harvard while filming Star Wars. Emma Watson attended Brown University while speaking at the United Nations. Both women had the privilege of growing up in environments that supported their brilliance, that embraced their intellect alongside their beauty and talent. But Sharon? She was growing up in the 1960s in a blue-collar town where being a genius girl wasn't celebrated. It was punished. There was no roadmap for a girl like her. No one saying you can be brilliant and beautiful, you can lead. So instead of encouragement, she learned how to shrink herself. She toned it down. She got quiet. She learned to walk through life pretending not to see as much as she did. And yet, inside, that hunger to be more never went away. It just went underground. Buried beneath the teasing and the silence was a mind that refused to stop dreaming. A mind that would one day look at Hollywood and think, I can do this. I will do this. But genius is not just about intelligence. It's also about sensitivity, a heightened awareness of pain, injustice, and the world's contradictions. And for someone like Sharon Stone, who would go on to face trauma, betrayal, and enormous public pressure, that sensitivity would become both a gift and a burden. It's important to realize brilliance, especially in girls, often comes with a cost. Society doesn't always know what to do with a girl who's smarter than the boys, who's not afraid to speak up, who sees through the illusions. Sometimes, it tries to silence her. Other times, it just ignores her completely. And the scars from that rejection? They don't fade easily. Sharon once said, I never really fit in. I never felt like I belonged, not even when I became famous. That feeling didn't start in Hollywood. It started in a small classroom in Pennsylvania, where being a genius meant sitting alone at lunch, learning early that people feared what they couldn't understand. But here's the powerful truth. Sharon never gave up on that mind of hers. She never dulled it down permanently. And while the world would go on to judge her for her looks, for a film role, or for who she dated, her greatest asset would always remain the same, her mind. Because behind every seductive smile on screen, there was a brain that worked like a steel trap. A woman who could memorize complex scripts in hours, who spoke multiple languages, who studied art history, philosophy, and politics, not for fame, but because she loved to learn. And in time, that mind would become her greatest tool in rebuilding a life that fame had tried to tear down. So what do we take from this? Being extraordinary doesn't always mean being accepted. And sometimes, the smartest people in the room spend years hiding who they really are, just to survive. Some wounds are invisible, but they leave the deepest scars. By the time Sharon Stone was being hailed as Hollywood's ultimate femme fatale, few people could have imagined the darkness she had survived as a child. Behind the red carpet glamour, beneath the sharp wit and commanding presence, there was a secret, one she carried alone for decades. In her 2021 memoir, The Beauty of Living Twice, Sharon Stone opened a door that had remained locked for most of her life. With raw honesty, she revealed that she had been sexually abused by her maternal grandfather as a young girl. It wasn't a one-time incident. It was repeated trauma that lived in the shadows of her childhood. She didn't tell anyone, not because she didn't want to, but because she was terrified. She wrote that her grandfather threatened her. If you ever tell anyone, I will kill you. That's what children are often told by their abusers. Words that become invisible chains wrapped around their voices. For Sharon, those chains lasted well into adulthood. And then came the moment that haunts her to this day. When her grandfather died, her grandmother locked the door to the room where his body lay and forced Sharon and her sister to stand and look at him. There were no explanations. No tears. No comfort. Just silence. Cold and suffocating. Imagine that. You've survived unspeakable trauma at the hands of someone who was supposed to protect you. Then, when he dies, you're not offered peace. You're offered stillness. A final act of denial wrapped in eerie ritual. That moment didn't bring closure. It brought confusion. And that confusion would echo inside her for years. So long, Sharon didn't speak about what had happened. She buried the memories, as so many survivors do. The brain, in its brilliance, finds ways to protect itself from pain, through repression, detachment, even forgetting. But pain doesn't disappear. It waits, it resurfaces, and when it does, it demands to be seen. Sharon Stone's decision to share her truth wasn't just a personal release. It was a courageous act of solidarity, especially in the era of the #MeToo movement, when millions of women and men began to step forward with stories of abuse, often hidden for decades. Her story wasn't just about Hollywood, or fame, or survival. It was about what happens behind closed doors in ordinary homes, the kind of abuse that millions of Americans have lived through, but few have ever spoken about. According to the CDC, about 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 13 boys experience sexual abuse during childhood in the United States. And yet, the majority of these cases are never reported. Why? Fear, shame, guilt, the belief that no one will believe them. Or worse, that speaking up will destroy their family. Sharon's story underscores this cruel reality. She came from a family that didn't speak about feelings, much less trauma. Her parents worked long hours. Her town was small, resources were limited, and abuse wasn't just a taboo, it was something you were taught to forget. So how did she make it through? How did she carry that pain and still rise? The truth is, surviving is not the same as healing. For years, Sharon simply endured. She pushed forward, burying the trauma beneath ambition and performance. But healing didn't begin until much later. Through therapy, reflection, and, most importantly, naming what had happened to her. She described the moment those memories returned like a dam breaking. It was horrifying, but it was also necessary. As she put it, I remembered. I finally remembered. And I realized I wasn't crazy. That moment of truth is something many survivors experience. The terrifying clarity that what they buried wasn't a nightmare, but reality. And in that clarity, a new kind of strength is born. The strength to speak. The strength to reclaim the story. What Sharon Stone did by speaking out wasn't just brave. It was vital. It sent a message to survivors everywhere. You're not alone, you're not crazy, you're not broken. And you have the right to speak. We often admire Sharon Stone for her beauty, her screen presence, her glamorous aura. But perhaps her most remarkable quality is her resilience. The kind that comes not from surviving fame, but from surviving childhood in silence and still choosing to live out loud. The lesson here is powerful and sobering. Not everyone who survives heals, but healing can begin the moment you speak. The dream was big, but the cost? Even bigger. For many young girls in small towns, the dream of Hollywood glows like a distant star. For Sharon Stone, that dream burned brighter than most, not because she wanted to be famous, but because she wanted to be free. Meadville, Pennsylvania wasn't the kind of place where dreams ran wild. It was a quiet, blue-collar town where ambition was often mistaken for arrogance. Growing up, Sharon always knew she didn't belong. She was too sharp, too curious, too different. And once she graduated high school at just 15, yes, 15, she knew she had to leave if she ever wanted to find herself. Her first escape route came through a surprising channel, a local beauty pageant. Despite not seeing herself as the pageant type, she followed the encouragement of friends and family and entered. To her surprise, she won. That crown wasn't just a shiny accessory, it was her ticket out. Soon after, she was offered a modeling contract in New York City with the prestigious Ford modeling agency. In New York, Sharon quickly found success in front of the camera. She posed for magazines, modeled designer clothes, and became a regular in the city's fashion scene. But something didn't sit right. standing still in front of flashing lights expected only to look beautiful, felt hollow. She didn't want to just be seen, she wanted to say something. She didn't want to be a mannequin, she wanted to be a storyteller. So she set her sights on acting. And that's when the real struggle began. Breaking into Hollywood is never easy. But for Sharon, it was a gauntlet. Casting directors dismissed her. She was told, often bluntly, that she wasn't soft enough, that her face was too angular, her presence too intimidating. She was pretty, yes, but not in the way Hollywood wanted, not girlish enough, not innocent enough, and certainly not sexy in the way male directors were used to. Sharon Stone was, in their eyes, too much woman, and not enough fantasy. One casting agent reportedly told her, "You're too smart for this part. You'll outshine the male lead." It was meant as a criticism. In Hollywood, a woman with intelligence and edge wasn't celebrated. She was feared. Instead of bending to fit the mold, Sharon decided to sharpen her craft. She studied acting, honed her ability to hold silence on screen, learned how to layer emotion with a single glance. Those who worked with her early on, from directors to fellow actors, described her as intensely prepared, deeply intuitive, and willing to do the hard work. But still, the roles were scarce. She landed small parts in films like Stardust Memories, 1980, and Irreconcilable Differences, 1984. But Hollywood still didn't know what to do with her. She wasn't boxable. She wasn't alone. Viola Davis, despite her powerhouse talent and later Oscar wins, spent years typecast in secondary roles, often maids, mothers, or characters in pain. Why? Because she didn't fit the classic mold of a leading lady in Hollywood. Jamie Lee Curtis, who would become the scream queen of horror, was also told early on that she wasn't feminine enough, that her features were, quote, too strong. These women, like Sharon, had to carve out their own space in an industry designed to reward sameness. Hollywood, for all its glamour, has long relied on templates. The sexy blonde, the girl next door, the tragic beauty. And if you don't fit one, they don't try to create a new one for you. They just turn the page. Sharon Stone didn't break into the system by being the prettiest in the room. She broke in by being the most persistent. By refusing to accept that her value was limited to a stereotype. By choosing roles that scared her, challenged her, and, eventually, forced the world to see her differently. And yet, here's the truth we often avoid. Talent alone isn't enough in Hollywood. Neither is intelligence, beauty, or work ethic. What often determines success is whether you can fit the image that someone else, usually a man in power, has already decided is marketable. That's not fair. It never was. But Sharon Stone's early struggles show us that while breaking free from a small town is hard, breaking through Hollywood's invisible walls is even harder. Still, she didn't quit. She kept showing up, kept auditioning, kept telling herself, if I'm not what they're looking for, then maybe I'll show them something they didn't know they needed. And one day, that moment came, in the form of a film that would change her life forever. When your heartbreak becomes a headline. For most people, love is private. When it goes wrong, you get to grieve in silence, among friends, maybe behind closed doors. But if you're Sharon Stone, a woman whose every move has been under the microscope, heartbreak becomes a spectacle. Her romantic history reads like the plot of a soap opera, not because it was scandalous, but because the world wanted it to be. Let's start with Michael Greenberg, her first husband, a television producer she married in 1984 after working together on the Vegas Strip War. At first glance, it seemed like a match made in Hollywood heaven. Both ambitious, both successful. But within 3 years, the marriage unraveled. There were no explosive public fights, no salacious details, just a quiet separation and a long, drawn-out divorce. The press didn't care much then, not yet. Sharon Stone wasn't that famous yet. Then came Dwight Yoakam, the country music star whose signature cowboy hat was as iconic as her icy stare. Their relationship, which began in the early 1990s, was brief but loud. They debuted as a couple at the 1992 Oscars, she in elegant velvet, he in rugged denim, and just as quickly, it all fell apart. Years later, Sharon would call dating him the biggest mistake of my life. When asked about their chemistry, she didn't hold back. Kissing him was like eating a dirt sandwich. That quote made headlines everywhere. It's easy to laugh at a line like that. But the pain behind it was real. Sharon, by then one of the most scrutinized women in Hollywood, couldn't afford to just leave a relationship. She had to explain it, justify it, and usually defend herself. Because the moment it ended, the tabloids came for her. That pattern repeated itself with William J. McDonald, a film producer she met while working on Sliver. They got engaged shortly after he left his wife of 5 months, a timeline that sparked a media firestorm. His ex-wife publicly accused Sharon of being a, quote, homewrecker on national television, saying she, quote, stole my husband and my dream. Sharon's team denied any wrongdoing, but it didn't matter. The narrative had already been set. And finally, there was Phil Bronstein, executive editor of the San Francisco Chronicle. This was supposed to be the happy ending. They married on Valentine's Day, adopted a son, and for a moment, it looked like Sharon had finally found peace. But when she suffered a brain hemorrhage, everything changed. She returned home from the hospital to find that Phil had filed for divorce. Not only that, he sued for full custody of their son, and won. The court ruled that Sharon's past, specifically her role in Basic Instinct, made her an unfit parent. In one heartbreaking moment, the judge asked her son if he knew that his mother had starred in an adult film. A 16-second scene filmed more than a decade earlier was suddenly used to define her entire character. It was cruel, and it was public. But what makes all of this more painful isn't just the heartbreak, it's the way the world responded. In every relationship, Sharon was painted as the difficult one, the seductive one, the one who must have done something wrong. She was blamed, mocked, even ridiculed, while her partners largely moved on, their reputations untouched. This isn't unique to Sharon, we've seen it play out again and again. When Angelina Jolie filed for divorce from Brad Pitt, the media questioned her parenting, her stability. When Meghan Markle and Prince Harry stepped back from royal life, headlines accused her of, quote, breaking up the monarchy. When women, especially powerful, intelligent, famous women, walk away from a relationship, the world assumes they must have been the problem. It's a reflection of a culture that's still deeply uncomfortable with women who don't conform, who don't stay silent or submissive or smiling through pain. And in Sharon's case, it wasn't just misogyny, it was the cost of being a woman who refused to apologize for her strength. But here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Being famous doesn't protect you from heartbreak. Being rich doesn't protect you from betrayal. And being powerful doesn't stop people from blaming you when things fall apart. Sharon Stone once said, "The more famous I became, the more people thought I was invincible. But I wasn't. I was just trying to hold myself together like everyone else." In many ways, fame didn't shield her from pain. It magnified it. It took every scar, every misstep, every private heartbreak, and put it on display. She didn't just live through breakups. She had to live through the narratives that others built around them. But here's the remarkable thing. She kept her head up. She didn't let bitterness define her. She raised her children, she rebuilt her life, and she learned to trust herself again, even if she never fully trusted love. Because the lesson Sharon Stone teaches us isn't just about romance. It's about resilience. It's about what happens when the world tries to define you by who left you, who hurt you, or who misunderstood you, and you decide to define yourself anyway. What do you do when your body forgets who you are? It happened without warning. One moment, Sharon Stone was attending a glamorous fashion show in Milan, poised, radiant, unshakable. The next, she was collapsing in front of a stunned crowd, her body trembling, her mind slipping away. The headache had started like a whisper. Then, in seconds, it became a scream. Back home in Los Angeles, things took a terrifying turn. A blinding pain shot through her skull like a bolt of lightning. She fell backward off the couch, hitting her head on a table, and crumpled to the floor. That was the moment Sharon Stone's life split in two. Doctors would later tell her she had suffered a massive brain hemorrhage, a rare type of stroke caused by a ruptured artery. Blood poured into her brain, her spine, her face. For 9 days, her life hung in the balance. Her chances of survival? 1%. In those long, disorienting hours, Sharon drifted in and out of consciousness. She described seeing a soft, warm light. Not the cold fluorescence of hospital rooms, but something almost divine. In that moment, she says she felt her soul beginning to leave her body. And then, just as gently, something pulled her back. That something was her son, Rowan. In her near-death haze, she remembered his face, small, innocent, full of need, and she knew she couldn't go. She wouldn't go. She whispered into the phone, "Mom, I'm having a brain hemorrhage." Her mother answered with 4 words that echoed louder than any siren. "I'm coming. I love you." Miraculously, Sharon survived. But the Sharon who opened her eyes in that hospital bed was not the woman the world remembered. She was emaciated, her right leg dragged behind her. Her speech was slurred. She couldn't read, couldn't write, couldn't even remember her own name clearly. 18% of her body mass was gone, and her mind felt like it had been wiped clean. The woman who once commanded a movie set with icy precision now struggled to sign a check or hold a fork. To make things worse, there was no structured rehabilitation program for someone like her. She had no medical insurance, no long-term neurological support. And Hollywood? It didn't call. In fact, it closed its doors. She later said, "I lost everything. My place in the business, my money, my custody of my child, even my identity." In one of the loneliest moments of her life, Sharon had an encounter with a Buddhist monk. Looking into her eyes, he told her something that would change the way she understood her own journey. "You have been reincarnated into your own body." It was a strange idea, but it made sense. She hadn't come back from that stroke as the same person. Everything had changed. Her senses, her emotions, her capacity for language, even her perception of time. She was learning to be human again, from the ground up. From a medical perspective, Sharon's recovery was nothing short of extraordinary. According to neurologists, surviving a hemorrhagic stroke of that magnitude is rare. Recovering basic function afterward, walking, talking, forming new memories, is even rarer. Dr. Lisa M. Shulman, a neurologist at the University of Maryland School of Medicine, once wrote, "Neurological injury doesn't just steal physical ability, it challenges the very idea of identity." And recovery isn't just about healing the brain, it's about rebuilding the self. And that's exactly what Sharon Stone did. Day by day, she fought. She learned to write her name again, one painstaking letter at a time. She spoke to herself in the mirror, syllable by syllable, retraining her mouth to form words. She asked questions. She read children's books to stimulate her comprehension. She even used meditation and visualization to learn to write her name again, one painstaking letter at a time. No camera crews followed her. She spoke to herself in the mirror, syllable by syllable, retraining her mouth to form words. This wasn't a movie comeback. It was a human one. We often talk about strengths to stimulate her comprehension. She even used meditation and visualization to reconnect her mind and body. The empires they build. No camera crews followed her. Greatest strength no magazines documented this chapter. It was here, in these quiet, unseen hours, where she wrestled her identity back from the brink. The lesson is profound. When everything is stripped away, the fame, the beauty, the applause, who are you really? And what are you willing to fight for when no one's watching? Sometimes, the deepest wounds don't come from illness. They come from the courtroom. After surviving a near-fatal stroke, relearning how to walk, talk, and function again, Sharon Stone believed she had already faced the worst. She had looked death in the eye and refused to back down. But when she returned home, frail and fragile, there was one more blow waiting for her. And it wasn't medical. It was legal. And it was personal. Her husband, journalist Phil Bronstein, had filed for divorce. And more devastatingly, he wanted full custody of their son, Roan. Sharon had adopted Roan in 2000, and he was the light of her life. She had poured herself into motherhood, even as her health collapsed around her. But now, just as she was slowly reclaiming her life, she was being asked to prove that she deserved to keep the child she loved most. The courtroom didn't focus on the countless hours she had spent in therapy or the battles she had fought to survive. Instead, during one of the most heartbreaking moments in the trial, the judge reportedly asked her son, "Do you know your mother once starred in an adult-rated film?" He was referring, of course, to Basic Instinct, the very film that had launched her to fame 16 years earlier. That scene. That one scene. Again. In a world where violence is normalized on screen, and male actors are often celebrated for risque roles, Sharon was being labeled an unfit mother, not because of anything she had done as a parent, but because of a choice she made as an artist nearly 2 decades earlier. It didn't matter that Basic Instinct was a critically acclaimed psychological thriller. It didn't matter that Sharon had never once endangered her child. What mattered, to the court at least, was a few seconds of nudity, taken out of context, weaponized against her. And it didn't stop there. The judge further criticized Sharon for supposedly being too concerned about her son's hygiene, even referencing an alleged suggestion that Rowan receive Botox injections in his feet to prevent odor. Sharon later denied this claim entirely, calling it absurd and humiliating. But the damage was done. In 2008, the court sided with Braunstein. Rowan would primarily live with his father. Sharon was granted only limited visitation rights. It was a loss that cut deeper than any Hollywood rejection. As she later said in an interview, "It broke my heart. It broke something in me that I didn't know could break." But perhaps more painful than the custody ruling itself was what it represented. A system that still punishes women for being visible, for being sexual, for being powerful. Sharon's case is not unique. Think of Britney Spears, who spent years under a court-ordered conservatorship that stripped her of control over her finances, her career, even her body, largely under the guise of protecting her. Or Angelina Jolie, whose parenting was publicly scrutinized during her custody battle with Brad Pitt, despite having adopted and raised 6 children with care and devotion. In each of these stories, the pattern is disturbingly familiar. When women in the public eye deviate from society's narrow expectations, when they are too provocative, too independent, too outspoken, their motherhood is questioned. Their competence is attacked. Their character is reduced to a headline. The double standard is glaring. Men in Hollywood can play serial killers, cheaters, abusers, and no judge asks their children, "Did you know what your father did in that movie?" But women? Women are still held to a 1950s morality code, where the roles they take on screen are used to define their fitness off-screen. Let's be clear. Sharon Stone wasn't just punished for her past. She was punished for the idea of who people thought she was. And in doing so, the court didn't just take her child. It took her dignity. But Sharon, as always, chose not to be defined by what was taken from her. She kept showing up, kept loving her son, kept fighting, in her own way, to be present in his life, even when the world told her she didn't belong in it. This chapter of her story isn't glamorous. It doesn't come with red carpets or applause. But it's one of the most powerful parts of who she is, because it reminds us that being a mother isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up, with love, with truth, with everything you have, even when they try to take it all away. They said she was done, so she picked up a paintbrush and began again. After her stroke, after losing custody of her son, and after years of public heartbreak, Sharon Stone returned to Hollywood, but it didn't welcome her back. The same industry that had once put her face on every magazine, that had branded her the sexiest woman alive, now barely returned her calls. Directors were no longer interested. Studios didn't see her as a box office draw. Casting agents whispered what no actor ever wants to hear. She's too old. She's too difficult. She's a has-been. And the roles that did come? They were unworthy of her talent. She played a villain in Catwoman, 2004, a film that was widely panned and earned her a Razzie Award. She returned in Basic Instinct 2, 2006, a sequel that failed to capture the complexity of the original, and was dismissed as a desperate attempt to relive past glory. Other appearances were minor, forgettable. She was working, yes, but far from the leading lady she had once been. It was a quiet exile. And for someone who had rebuilt her mind, her body, and her soul, it hurt. "I want my career back," she once admitted in a deeply vulnerable interview. "I still haven't regained it." But when Hollywood turned its back, Sharon Stone didn't collapse. She transformed. She began to paint. It started as a form of therapy, a way to process grief, trauma, silence. But soon, it became something more. Painting wasn't just healing, it was reawakening. Sharon didn't approach the canvas with formal technique or academic rules. She approached it with emotion, with memory, pain, resilience. Her style leaned abstract, bold strokes, textured layers, emotional color palettes. Her paintings weren't always pretty. They weren't meant to be. They were honest. In 2023, Sharon began exhibiting her art publicly. The response was staggering. Audiences in Berlin, Los Angeles, and San Francisco praised her work as deeply intuitive, visceral, and unexpectedly profound. Art critics and collectors no longer saw just a former actress trying something new. they saw a woman who had something powerful to say. One of her pieces, titled Mother and Child, was a haunting blend of soft whites and blood-red streaks. Sharon explained that it was inspired by the pain of losing custody of her son, a grief that still lingered in her bones. Another, called Rebirth, was an explosion of yellow and cobalt, the colors swirling upward like fire escaping the earth. "It's about coming back," she told one reporter. "About choosing to live again, even when you don't recognize the world you're living in." And perhaps the most poignant of all was the light at the end. A canvas covered in gentle shades of gold and gray, with a single sharp line piercing through the middle. It was a visual metaphor for her near-death experience, for the light she had seen, the peace she had felt, and the moment she decided to return to this life. In an interview with The Guardian, Sharon said, "Painting saved me. When no one would give me a role, the canvas gave me space. It let me scream, cry, laugh, love, without judgment." Her exhibitions have since expanded. In 2024, she was invited to show her work at Arapaxis in Rome, one of the most prestigious art venues in the world. A space once reserved for Roman emperors now displayed the emotional legacy of a woman Hollywood discarded.